Welcome back to the channel, guys. On today's episode, I was going to do a how to build a walnut countertop, but this is almost turning into a what not to do video. So I've been trying to work on the finish here. This wasn't where I was going to start the video, but I have been using, or what I am using is a conversion varnish finish. So it's a varnish finish that uses an additive, sort of a part A, part B sort of mix. And it results in an absolute bulletproof finish. So when you're using it in a wet application like a bathroom, for instance, where you're going to see some cleaning chemicals, where you're going to see water left on the surface, a conversion varnish works really well for that type of application. It is a spray-on application. I think I did tell one of my subscribers that I don't spray varnish anymore. Sorry, I may have lied. This is one product that a varnish that I still will spray. I've had really good luck with it in the past. Works really well too if you're doing like wooden handrails, any high-touch surfaces. They use it in like bars a lot. When they want just like a bulletproof finish, you can spill beer on it and whatever all day long, and you aren't going to stain the wood, you aren't going to mar it, and it cleans up really easily. I made my way out to the shop now, and this is kind of what I start working with as far as a rough sketch. It's pretty terrible, but it does give me my rough measurements for what I want to do for the finished vanity. I've also got notes of my 3" and 3". So because I'm going to mill this down to probably right around 3/4 inch, because I've got 4/4 lumber, so it's just about 1 inch rough. Once I mill it down, it should be about 3/4, maybe a bit over. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually make this a little bit longer and a little bit wider, so that I can then cut off the front of it, and then I'll flip that over and double it up on the front, and then do the same thing on the side. And then that way from the side it's going to look like it's 1.5 inches thick, but really it is only 3/4 inch thick through most of it. And I want the 3" so that it will cover all the way over to the sort of base of the cabinet. Off that initial sort of basic sketch that I did, I went back and looked at sort of what my minimum widths would be, both in front of where the sink's going to sit and behind of where the sink is going to sit, as well as on both sides. Now this took into account the 3" on these two sides where I wanted to cut off and then flip them over and double them up so that the whole piece appears as though it's 1.5 inches thick when really it's only 3/4 inch thick. So did the thickness planed everything, used the jointer to get the one edge straight and one flat surface done. On these large boards I've only got a 6" jointer, so you can kind of see it here. I did half the board at a time and then flipped it over. Not the best way to do it, but gets the high spots out anyways, so that you can run it through the thickness planer. So once I had that all done, then it was just a case of cutting them to widths to get sort of this measurement. And so for that, I basically just put the top and bottom board that I was going to use that would encapsulate my 7" and my 10". Then went back and looked at my overall length or depth that I wanted for the countertop. Now I had to go add the 3" here for the extra 3" overlap. Set that, and then that would allow me to figure out how much space I needed here. So I went with the one large board and then sort of a 2" filler piece here. Then I glued it up. Now this is out of glue up. I did clean off the glue squeeze out,
and this is sort of what we're left with. So we got a nice flat slab here to start working on. I'm going to cut the 3 inches off the side first, and then cut the 3 inches off the front, and then we can start that glue up. So we got the front trimmed off here. Now this came off like so. So what I'm going to do is rotate that down and glue it like this, and that should look like it was a full 1.5 inches thick. Green in color and everything should match quite nicely, and if I get a good glue joint there, it should pretty much disappear. Alright guys, so I've gone down to the basement and I have made sure that everything is looking good fit-wise. I did trim it where it's going to meet up along the wall, and so I've got the outside dimensions finalized. What's left is to finalize the cutout for the sink. Now there's a few different ways to do this, but what I've found the easiest is that my router with a 1/4 inch bit is just about 2 3/4 inch offset. So looking at the router from like the tip here to this outside edge is 2 3/4 inch. So I built this frame here 2 3/4 inch wider than what I want the cutout for the sink to be. So now I can run this around using the outside of this guy touching here, and that should give me a line all the way around the same dimension that I want it for the sink cutout. So the biggest thing is to make sure that these are square. I did have 4 blocks here, but over time and whatever, because I did make this up when I was building the house, so it's a couple years old now and it's been banged around, so it wasn't quite square. I did have to pop the one off on the far corner there to get it squared up, but just make sure it's square. Double check and measure everything before you go, and you should be all set. So I'll set you guys up on a tripod here, and we'll start cutting this out.
Alright, so here the real important part is to just really double check your measurements. You kind of got one shot at this, and then I'm taking very light passes, so or what I consider light passes. So you know, it'll probably take me 4 times around to cut through the 3/4 inch. And yeah, you're just working it slowly, making sure you're keeping good contact with that outside rail, and that outside rail is not moving on you. So you see that I've got sort of 4 or 5 clamps on it to ensure that it is not going to move. And yeah, you just sort of start working it around and slowly cut through. You don't want to be burning the wood, and so that's why I'm doing some vacuuming in between. And now I'm going to router all the edges here with a 1/16 inch round over bit. Now the reason for the 1/16 is that it will just break that edge ever so slightly, and it's a lot more consistent than hand sanding the edge. If you go any larger than a 1/16 bit, you're going to start taking away from kind of the thickness as it appears visually when you look at it.
I don't do this all the time, day in and day out, but the one thing that does help me substantially in trying to get really great results is doing lots of mock-ups. So here I've got the countertop of, or the top for the Vanity, all milled out, all glued together like I showed you just in the previous clip. I have rounded over the edges with an 1/8 inch round over bit and started some of the preliminary sanding. We also got the cutout done for the sink, and to mock things up, I have it sitting here on a couple supports. I've set it on top, I've laid down underneath to try to center this in the opening. And so that got this mocked up to where I was happy with the look. And yes, I was lying on my back under there taking a look at it. And the next step was to drill this hole for the faucet. So again, because I don't do it a lot, it's kind of one of those measure 4 times, drill hopefully once. And you just have to make sure that you're aware of all of the mounting solutions or how your faucet mounts. So this has sort of the C-shaped clip that goes in, and it is not necessarily centered to the center of the opening. So I actually had to move the hole back 1/4 of an inch in order to allow clearance here so that it wouldn't interfere with the actual sink where it was mounted. But I wanted to make sure that this wasn't at all on top of this flange and it was sitting flat on the wood here. That would give me a much better surface to clamp against. This wasn't going to be on any angle or anything like that. And I can make sure that the faucet itself was absolutely as secure as possible. So, from the underside, it's going to look like this. So we got everything centered, everything is looking good. Up here we got the same reveal on both sides, and then same front to back. So here I'm doing the first coat of the conversion varnish finish. So it's a 2-part varnish finish, and this stuff is bulletproof. So great product, but does stink, so you do have to take your precautions there. So this is the first coat to get everything sealed up, and then be some sanding, and then successive coats.
For whatever reason, I've done this quite a bit before. I've got them all throughout my house. I have tried finishing this too many times. So the first time, first failure that I had, I was getting a couple little white specks out of my paint gun. And so with the gun cleaner that I was using with the solvent base, it was pulling some latex paint out of the gun that hadn't come out with my regular cleaning cycle. Where it was in the gun, I've got no idea, but it left little white specks, and I got a video that I'll show you on that one, sort of showing that. So sanded it down, started over, attempt 2 for the second coat. First coat went down really well, was great. Sanded it down. It was a second coat that I ended up getting some white specks in it. Knew I could do better. Went back. Second time I accidentally used a cup that I had from the previous day that I thought all the conversion varnish had sort of flashed off and cured. But when I was mixing that, it ended up dissolving some of the conversion varnish that was still in the container. And when I poured that into the gun, that came off like little boogers sort of thing into it. So semi-liquid strings. And so I did one pass of the spray gun, and a couple of these came spitting out and onto the workpiece. So that ruined that attempt. That was a minor one because I only did sort of one spray pass. I was able to come back half an hour later, sand that off, did another coat. This one turned out really nice, except I had 2 or 3 pieces of fuzz that had fallen into the finish. And unfortunately, they were kind of at the front where you'd potentially see them. They were kind of not really short hairs, but like short little fibers sort of thing. So don't know where they came from, but again, I knew I could do better. So Next day sanded that down, did this last coat that it's on right now, and I got some black flecks of something. I think it was actually in the gun. I remember, or in the cup that I was mixing from. I do know that when I was mixing, I had poured it out of the jug, and maybe there was some stuff on the brim or something. But I do remember seeing them when I was mixing it up. I pulled out a couple. I thought I was good, and then went to spray, and I've got some more imperfections in the finished product. I did pull out a couple that I saw when it was just freshly sprayed, and then just kind of did a little drip out of the container to try to fill those back in. Worked decent, but at certain angles you can kind of see where there's a little bit of a hump where it didn't have time to flatten out fully. So again, not perfect. So I'm going to sand it down one more time. I think that's attempt 5 or so to get the final coat down. I'll have to sand off this coat completely, almost start from scratch, and hopefully this is the last time that I have to spray this conversion varnish. Shouldn't be this hard, but for this go around, for some reason it seems to be really kicking my butt. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video for the build of the countertop, and you've already checked out the video for installing the base cabinet as well. So this is part 2. Part 3 will be installing the backsplash here, as well as the trim and doing the grout work. So I'll walk you through that process and show you a few tips and tricks to get all the miters for the aluminum to just fit up just nice, and try to make it as easy as possible so you're not struggling through that project if it's something you're thinking of taking on yourself. So we'll see you in the next video, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks.